thanks so much for coming along to your own podcast studio for the Collabs Conversations podcast. I appreciate it. Um, yeah, we're really excited. Like this, as we sort of said before, this is something we've been planning for a while, and I'm really keen to sort of get what you guys are doing in the lab out. Not that you need that much more press. You've been in the press quite a lot lately, which is really exciting. But I think from our point of view, we're really interested in getting like the origin stories and how people got started and all of that sort of stuff. So um, yeah, maybe we can start somewhere there. I might lead with Paul and then Andy, lads, if you want to follow up. Um, I mean, what you've had a very interesting career, like very non-linear, lots of different pivots and places that you've gone, you know, from banking to founding Absolute MMA. Like what how did you end up here? Like I'm sure you can look back in retrospect and go, ah yes, like connected the dots. But I mean, you're even in politics for a while as well. Like there's so much more than that's like just than a normal, let's say, startup or biotech company. Like there's quite an interesting background.
Yeah, I've definitely done a lot of things, and there has been a lot of pivots. And the industry that we're in now didn't even exist, 5-10 years ago. So look, it has been a really interesting journey. I guess going back, way back, to childhood. I always had an affinity with animals, and was pretty nerdy at school, and had a bit of a penchant for mathematics, and did the usual thing, and went to university and studied economics at university, and ended up doing a postgrad in applied statistics, which is really, really boring to most people who couldn't think of anything worse. But for me, that was just my aptitude was for maths, and so studied economics. Always wanted to get involved in business, but with that aptitude for maths. Ended up doing quite a few different things. My first job actually out of uni was at an insurance company. Again, not the most exciting place to start, but I had done a few different jobs while at uni. None of that are really worth mentioning, but very varied and different things. But I guess coming out of that, and I actually ended up not long after working at Tabcorp and building prediction models there. So again, utilizing that maths and stats background, and then eventually ended up in finance and working at NAB and at ANZ, and again at NAB I was working in the mortgage space there. So again, very finance related. I was involved in building models, application models, so scorecard application models, so for when people apply for credit and that sort of thing. So predicting out performance from that. And then, worked at ANZ where I managed the fraud analytics team. So my team was responsible for building models to predict and capture fraud. So whether that's, credit card fraud, application fraud, all those sorts of things. So that was for the banking system statewide, which was really interesting. Fraud's a really interesting space, and picking up, patterns and all that sort of thing. And so that was really interesting. But I'd always had an interest in business and having my own business, and had a few different ideas throughout those years. But eventually ended up establishing Absolute MMA, which is a mixed martial arts gym based in the CBD in Melbourne, well, in multiple locations now, and internationally as well. But I'd always had an interest in fitness as well, and was doing martial arts, and then partnered up with a good mate of mine who had experience in the gym space in terms of personal training studios and that sort of thing. And we were doing martial arts together at the time, and we just came up with that idea to establish that. As back in I think it was about 2010 we started. And so like UFC and all that sort of thing was not mainstream, was not popular, but we knew from the people that we hung out with that were doing martial arts, and every class was packed, and everyone had a gym membership, and everyone had a martial arts membership, and it was super expensive to be trying to do both. So we're like, wouldn't it make sense to combine these two things in the one facility where you can do all of your training, you can get a massage, you can see, your nutritionist, you can do your martial arts, and just, do it all in the one place with the one membership. And it all just made sense. So there wasn't a lot of like analytics that went into establishing the business. We're just like, hang on, we want to do this. There's a whole lot of other people that want to do this. Let's set this up and go from there. And so we did that, and I had that business for many years, and then eventually sold out of that and established a finance brokerage, Boss Finance. So that sort of, I guess, ties back into my experience at NAB in terms of the finance side of things. But throughout all that time, so I'd been vegetarian since a teenager, and I went vegan not long after I started the gym, actually. And so was really heavily interested in that space. So, I mean, I guess veganism, forms a large part of my life. So I've been vegan for nearly 10 years now, 9-10 years. And, the martial arts scene was great, and I was, passionate about that. But it wasn't the absolute driver in my life. It was just something that I enjoyed doing. And again, having the finance brokerage as well, again, interested in numbers, interested in helping people. We work with a lot of self-employed clients. So I was dealing with a lot of entrepreneurs, which is what I enjoyed. So helping self-employed clients, doing a lot of business lending and that sort of thing, which again was great, but not my absolute passion. And then through activism, and talking to people about, plant-based diets and veganism, traditional animal agriculture and all those sorts of things. Ended up, as you mentioned, getting involved with the Animal Justice Party. So back in 2016, I actually ran as the lead Senate candidate for the Animal Justice Party up in Queensland. And did quite a lot of work with them. So running the party up there, was involved nationally as well as national treasurer, doing a whole host of roles. So, that's running an election campaign, running the party, managing volunteers, speaking at rallies, talking to, doing outreach, talking to politicians about, law reform and, lots of bodies about law reform and all that sort of thing. But for me, something I'm really passionate about, but it was really difficult in terms of having impact. So, driving behaviour change is really hard. When you're talking to anyone, for humans, behaviour change is really hard, and diet and nutrition and meals and the culture around that is really embedded and a really personal choice. So for me to drive behaviour change that way was really difficult, and I think just is in general. So I was always looking for something that could have a bit more impact. I mean, 'cause obviously law reform is a long, lengthy process as well, and politics and the political system is really difficult to enact change in. Particularly when you're a very small minority, and probably a minority of not just the population but the political system as well, and all that sort of thing. And I didn't love the politics of politics, which sounds really strange. You're coming to it quite idealistic, and you're going to want to make these changes, and you're going to have this influence and all that sort of thing. But, that's not how politics actually works, how the system is set up. There's a lot of leverage involved. What can you do for me, and I'll do this for you, and all that sort of thing. So, we've got a lot of, large incumbents, industry-wise and politically in Australia as well. So it makes things really, really difficult. And so, for me, things weren't moving fast enough in terms of, what I wanted to do and, have a large impact for animals. So, started, I took a break from activism and started looking at different ways that, I could have that impact. And then obviously, food's a really large part of that. And we think about, where animals are, most used in terms of, the global system. Most of it's in food and food products. And so a lot of people suggested I get involved in a plant-based product. I created a plant-based business and, created, a better substitute. And, you know how far, veggie burgers have come and, people are interested in that. But I knew that wasn't the answer because, I'd spent hours upon hours talking to people in the street, just about their diet and behavior. No one wanted to know, right? No one wanted to know about, plant-based diets and eating a veggie burger. They all wanted to eat meat. And so not only was that incredibly frustrating, but it was really informative for me to have on the ground experience. I'm like, people do not want to change, right? They want to keep eating meat, and so that's when I did more and more research around what was possible. And many people, and you've probably heard me talk about reading Paul Shapiro's book Clean Meat, where he talks a lot about what was at that time going on overseas, and a couple of companies that were looking at this technology and trying to create products, whether that was leather products or food products and that sort of thing. And so that was really the turning point for me. I had heard about cultivated meat previously, or cultured meat, or clean meat, or lab grown meat, however you want to describe it. And I had heard about it previously, and as a vegan, I was like, not interested in that. Like that's why would I be interested in that? I don't want to eat meat. That's not for me. That seems like a strange idea. But the more and more I thought about it, and realised that it's not about me, it's about people that want to eat meat. That's where the change needs to come from. And so I thought about it more and more, and I'm like, hang on, we can create a real meat product so people don't need to change their behaviour. It's the same product that they have been eating for years and years and years and years and years. But there's the opportunity here, using a particular technology where we can produce a real meat product with the same taste, the same texture, the same mouthfeel. It's not a veggie burger. It's not a substitute. It's real meat. It's going to be better for the environment. It's going to be more sustainable. It's going to use less land, less water. It's going to produce less greenhouse gas emissions, and we're going to be able to produce it at some point much more cheaply than we can currently produce, or in the future produce, traditionally farmed products. I'm like, why wouldn't people choose that? Like, why would you not choose that product when given a choice? Because a lot of the complaints around, or the feedback around, plant-based products or plant-based substitutes is they don't taste like what the marketing says they taste like, because they're not, So a plant-based lamb doesn't really taste like plant-based lamb. Plant-based beef doesn't really taste like plant-based beef. Without any disrespect, it just doesn't, because it's not the same product, right? It's completely different. So, plants don't taste like meat. Meat tastes like meat. And so, so look, when I came across the technology and thought it could be possible, I sort of went all in that space. And I actually made a couple of investments in the space, and then not long after decided I was starting my own business here in Australia. And that's when I went looking for people to help me to do that, because obviously, with all that educational background and work background, I don't have a science background. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a food scientist. I've got a fair bit of experience on the business side of things, obviously, and bringing people together to work on something. And I guess even reflecting on, the mixed martial arts gym, that was, really me coming in from the business side and from, the personal training side. But, there's no way I can teach, every martial art. And so, that was a process of bringing in, the best boxing instructor, the best Muay Thai instructor, the best, BJJ instructor, the best wrestling instructor. Bring in a good, massage therapist, bring in someone to talk about nutrition, all those sorts of things. And, people laugh when I talk about that experience when they're running, a food company in the biotech space. But it's a very similar process, right? Bringing in the experts in each of those areas to work on a project. It took me a bit longer to find those people because, I'm not from academia. I don't have, a large network in the scientific space. And so, it took a good, 12 to 18 months for me to find the right people, because I knew the type of technology. Well, I thought I knew the type of technology that we wanted to use for it to be scalable, because I spent a long time researching, the field and the area, and obviously, the original product that was produced, the beef burger by Mark Post, which I think was 2013. and it costs, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they could do it in the lab. And I'm like, this is all great, but if there's no point us doing the same thing, right? It's not going to have the impact. It's going to be too expensive. It can't be scaled. And so, from my research, to me, it made sense that we would use induced pluripotent stem cell technology, which is scalable, can be done at obviously a lower price point because it is scalable. It has all the benefits of being able to produce, different cells and tissue types. Only requires the one sample from the animal. Cells proliferate indefinitely. We don't have to go back to the animal. So all of those things. And then obviously not using, FBS as well, so fetal bovine serum, because to me, ethically producing cultivated meat products and still killing animals just doesn't make any sense. Like, it just does not make any sense. And so, I with that in mind, I started talking to people who all thought I was crazy, right? Who all thought I had no idea what I was talking about. Didn't think it was possible, didn't think it could be done. And on the other hand, I had a lot of people tell me that they could do it, they had done it. No problem, which I also knew wasn't true. So I got sort of both ends of the spectrum, which was a really interesting lesson for me. And then so look, after a really long search right across the world to try and find the right people, to work with these livestock cells. And to do it without FBS and to use induced pluripotent stem cells. Obviously a lot of people I spoke to, throughout the industry are from the regenerative medicine industry and life sciences. So they've done a lot of those things with using FBS and using human cells. And so, it was a real challenge. And funnily enough, the best people to work on the project are in my hometown of Melbourne. So I didn't need to I didn't need to go all over the world to find them, and ended up reaching out to CSIRO here in Melbourne in Australia, and that's where I met Andrew, and that's where it all sprung from there.
Oh, it's so fascinating hearing you, I guess multiple times, making indirect reference to first principles, and how so much of the patterning and processes you've learned in your previous organizations have actually led to you then being able to play that out in a totally different context, because so much of it is translatable. It's always really interesting when you hear the backstories and you can see how it makes sense and it can be woven together. But, obviously at the time you might not have known it. But no, I thought that was really cool. And as well, I've never really thought about this, but now that I do think about it, Magic Valley, it's almost kind of like your organization is a form of activism in a way. Which
sneaky activism. Don't tell anyone that.
Yeah. Let's say it's through the conventional pathway of a commercial organization, right? But it's still, you are still trying to put a line in the sand and be like, this is what we stand for, and we're going to be able to make this happen. And I think it's really interesting to hear someone try and use the vector of business instead of trying to go through the political side of things or other areas, because this is always the thing that it falls back on: jobs and growth, or what about the economy? So I guess in a way, at least you're kind of addressing that and acknowledging that. You're saying behavior change can be difficult with food. Try doing behavior change from like an economic perspective. That is even more baked in than, let's say, like religious worldviews, the worldview are based around our current economic system. So, it's interesting to see, how you've managed to make that all happen. I'm just so curious. With the martial arts stuff, do you think that any of the skills that you learned through practicing martial arts translated to you, to your work? So like I heard you mention quite a lot of times, the need to pivot and to keep constantly adjusting. Is there any, do you feel like there is any translation between the two?
Yeah, a couple of people have asked me similar questions. I should probably make it clear that I'm not a professional fighter and not an elite martial artist. Anyone that's trained with me or seen me train will certainly attest to that. So I just make that point clear to begin with. But look, I think potentially, obviously, there's a lot of discipline required, and with any I guess physical endeavor, that you want to get good at. Look, I think there probably is. It's not something I've spent a lot of time thinking about, how that or how skills I've learned there have I've applied in other areas. But I guess it is a somewhat of a mental model. You've got to go from this position to that position. You've got to think on your feet. You've got to be able to strategize. You've got to be able to change that strategy. So I think there probably is.
Even the theory of mind stuff as well, like you're having to model another actor in the agent arena sort of relationship, and just even thinking about that first, second, third order, they're things that you have to think about strategically when running an organization. So
multiple moves ahead. Yes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I don't want to just have you sitting there, Andy.
I'm enjoying the conversation.
I think it was a really perfect segue, actually, sort of mentioning how you met at CSIRO. Did you want to pick up the story from there, Andy, and maybe give us a bit of a background on your story and how you got to where you got to then? And then feel free to lead the charge from then on to here.
Yeah, so very briefly, I'm a reasonably traditional scientist. I did a science degree. I did a couple of postdocs, one in Hong Kong and one in Philadelphia in the United States. I came back to Australia and have been working on human pluripotent stem cells mostly since 2001, so over 20 years. So when Paul came to me, well, Paul found me through the CSIRO inquiries, and it wound its way through the behemoth that is CSIRO to someone who knew about stem cells. And we'd actually, interestingly enough, we've been approached by a few different entities at CSIRO around different aspects of cellular agriculture and B2B products and things like that. So when Paul came to us, and he'd obviously done his research, and my response to him when he laid out what he thought was the way it was all going to work and what could CSIRO do for him, my response to him was, we have absolutely no idea if any of that is true. We went back to scientific first principles. We said, there's no published information, definitely no peer-reviewed information on whether what you're laying out will actually take place. So together we worked out, and this was done as contract research while my team was still at I and my team was still at CSIRO. What are the very first steps we need to take to see if this using stem cells to make a meat product can be done without using any other animal products, which was the tough question.
So like a MVP model, like a benchtop MVP. How long did that take?
The initial scoping project, I think we did over 3 or 4 months.
COVID didn't help.
Yeah.
So a lot of it was done remotely. Then the initial experimentation was done over another 3-month period. I think so. It's about 6 months all up.
That's pretty impressive, to be honest. Like to be able to get like a valid sort of MVP.
It probably wasn't at
Was it more like
it was more like a proof of concept pre-MVP.
Yeah.
It wasn't given the regulatory requirements for.
It's not like you could eat it.
Exactly.
I think that's a really interesting thing, actually. Like how do you label what you're doing? Because you see this all the time with science. Someone goes, "I've got an MVP," but it's not necessarily. You're like, this is a prototype of an idea to prove that it's possible, but it's not actually, I feel like you kind of see that people trying to force the tech bro mentality onto biotech when it's like this thing literally needs to take time to grow. I'd be interested to hear how you've managed to, deliver on these things. And do you just call them milestones? Do you call it an MVP product? Like, how do you structure that?
So, I mean, the way I think about it, and that may not be the way other scientists do it, and I come from a fairly formal academic background. So in usually writing grants to get money from government, so NHMRC, ARC type grants, where what you want to show is that you have proof of concept that it's possible and you have capacity to do it, so that the experience that you have, you could potentially carry it out. And that pretty much carries across to the way at CSIRO you're more industry facing, and you're looking at pushing things along the pathway through the valley of death to commercialization and to industrialization of processes. So what we were talking about before, that's done at a very small scale on the bench top. And it's done using what we can get our hands on. It's not necessarily done in the best or the cheapest way. It's the first, quickest proof of concept that it can be done. Taking that process and then extending that and making that into a manufacturing platform, which could be used on potentially different species and at a much larger scale. Every single divergence from the initial start point requires testing. So you need to know whether it's going to work on another species. It needs to be tested. You need to know, is it going to work in the scale of a few hundred mils to a few thousand mils to thousands of litres? We can model that, but until you actually do it and test it, there are the parameters that you need to test all need to be checked along the way. So we're all along that pathway now, and moving towards an MVP, and there's all sorts of other aspects to that in terms of regulatory environments, safety, and not coming from a food background, understanding the microbiological sterility. I'm used to sterility in terms of potentially doing things towards a human therapeutic, but it's different for a food product. There's different levels that you have to meet. So it's fun continuing to learn even at my advanced age.
Yeah, I think you called something out that's interesting there, that it's almost like you're never finished. It's like an iterative evolutionary process through which you're going to have to constantly be going through, rather than like a striving towards a fixed, MVP. So you obviously still got like goals and KPIs that you're aiming for, but it seems from what I can tell that especially in the biotech space, it kind of has to be like that, because it's not a fixed thing. It's not like a piece of code, which is immutable, so to speak. It's like a living thing. No, that's fascinating.
But just a quick point on, and both of you were talking about multiple steps ahead. So the process has to be fixed when you apply for regulation. So you that's the MVP that we're shooting for, to fix our process in place for a specific product or ingredient. But as soon as that's fixed in place, then we're working on the next thing, the next iteration, because we can clear headspace and actual people time space to add more species, to take it up a notch in terms of the scale that we can culture cells and things like that. So, because when it's with the regulators, it is locked in space and time for as long as they need.
Okay. I'm trying to get my head around whether, so obviously there must be a big difference between industry and academia, right? I feel like industry is more of a push, and academia is more of maybe like a pull towards a grant. Or I'm trying to see, is there enough relatability, or was there a bit of, let's say, like culture shock between the ways of working? Or you're saying that because CSIRO is more industry focused, you were kind of used to it? Like, is there any, I guess, are you using like design thinking principles or sprints, or are you trying to keep it more in the traditional style of doing the science? Like, because I assume there's a compromise on quality when you're trying to rush things. Like, it would be interesting to know how you sort of found, from both sides of it, how you found working with a more entrepreneurial in mind and sort of like, let's get it done, versus, the other side of the flip side of that, working with a scientist. Because these are really interesting stories, and like trying to figure out how to make that work, and how do you sort of harmonize those different sort of worldviews or approaches to making things happen.
So I close my ears now, Andrew.
No, not at all. I think it's so I'm not representative necessarily of every scientist that works in academia or has worked at CSIRO. My thinking has always been what is termed blue sky
Mm.
type research. I always like to think of the really long-term implications, the impact of the research that I was doing. So looking at understanding more about the basic biology of cells initially to make it safer and make it possible for human pluripotent cells to be used as therapy or screening. So things that are quite a long way down the track. And I was within the first couple of years of human embryonic stem cells. I was working with them, and my lab was the first in the country to work on human-induced pluripotent stem cells. So I think
it's like discovery. Like if we're going to label phases of research, you are more discovery than like a translation.
But at CSIRO, we moved. A lot of my projects were a little bit more contract research, but also commercialization of research tools, of things that we discovered along the way that were helpful to us, that were also helpful to many other researchers around the world. So large companies were willing to pay money to license them from us or pay CSIRO for perpetuity or for those products. The biggest difference between CSIRO and Magic Valley is the budget. And the facilities that are available. At an organisation like CSIRO, you have IT on the phone at any time. You've got people walking all around the country in different time zones, so there's always somebody there. You've got HR. You've got access to multiple $1 million of the latest equipment that is staffed by incredibly experienced scientists who are world experts in that machine. At Magic Valley, I had to work out where we put the cardboard that we unpacked our monitors from because there was nobody to tell me where it went. It's a little bit of a comic example, but I
feel the cardboard. That's definitely it. Especially at the lab. My gosh, like every week it's like, what do I do with this? Where does this go? So I was having a giggle. I'm like, yeah, that's a thing, definitely.
But what I think that's taught me is that one, there's a lot of money wasted in large organizations because you don't have to be resourceful. You can just buy more equipment, buy more of the latest product that comes out. You don't have to necessarily go back to first principles to work out, can we do this a cheaper way? Can we do this a more efficient way? This is let's just try this. I mean, it's not like you have an unlimited budget or anything like that. But you have to justify your budget and you have to apply for grants to bring the money in to do that. But the way the system seems to be set up, that type of research, as opposed to more biotech R&D, seems to be a lot more money available from governments to do that type of research, the discovery type research, which is important. Don't get me wrong. I think just where do you make that cut? I don't know. But I think that the R&D and the translation and the taking small scale to large scale often gets left out of the equation because it's not as sexy. It's not a breakthrough.
I was going to say, I feel like that's exactly why we exist, because of that sort of systemic issue, and the fact that there are perverse incentives, that it's not necessarily anyone's fault. It's just the way the system's set up. Like we don't want to blame anyone. We don't want to blame any of the players in the space. Like they're all doing the best with what they've currently got and the way the structures are. And a lot of them couldn't change, even though they acknowledge that they wish they could. But yeah, it's so fascinating. Like I hear you say that and then collectively feel our pain about resourcing and equipment and everything. Both that, like through Magic Valley and collabs, it's crazy when you think of like, there are companies where it's like they have to spend this money because they have a budget of $20 million. And if they don't spend that budget, they're only going to get 15 next year.
Yeah.
So they're like, obviously we're going to go and buy 3 of this thing that no one's necessarily going to use. And then a lot of that old equipment just gets thrown out, which is why we ended up setting up the Phoenix School program, the science charity we have. But it's hard to comprehend when you're working in a certain way and with a certain amount of budget and funding behind you. And then, as you said, coming to something like a startup and then being like, wow, like what would happen if we actually took that mindset with something like a CSIRO or with government money, and we actually, instead of just blasting it around, if we took that sort of startup mindset, it would be fascinating to see what would happen. But I feel like that's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, totally. But I just get picking up on that point, I guess, my background, from establishing the gym, we leased out an old disused Indian restaurant to fit out the gym, over multiple levels and hundreds of square meters. But there was a grease trap in there that we had to clean up and replace. We had to put in bathroom facilities, showers, all that sort of thing, which was difficult, but not that difficult, right? So we took over that premise and turned it into a gym. With my finance business, we went and rented office space, all quite simple things. Trying to get Magic Valley started, and just go and rent lab space was a near impossible task, because I spoke to most of the universities around the country, and they didn't want to let a private company in to use the facilities, which is where a lot of the facilities are in terms of lab space, equipment in the biotech space is really expensive, as we all know. And a lot of it's sitting there unused. There's a lot of lab space unused, but they don't want to let you access it. And the model they have is for you to do contract research with them, that you obviously pay for, and then those organisations want to retain the IP and license it back to you, which no one in their right mind would enter into that agreement. It just makes no commercial sense whatsoever.
This is why we've got a 1 out of 10 ranking when it comes to translational research and IPs and patents here in Australia.
100%.
So it's like, yeah.
And so I think during that time, that 18 months when I was trying to find people and then a space to work, I think I might have talked to Andrew Gray, your partner, at that point sometime back then, and then to see if there was any potential space available and that sort of thing, and it just took months and months and months, and I know you were full up. And I remember a conversation that we had, Sam, many conversations that we had, but how you were so not desperate, but just wanted to help us so much and get us space to work on what we were doing. And I'm ever so thankful for that, because we had nowhere to go. Like, we would have had to build our own space from scratch, which we just didn't have the money to do. And so
all the time, speaking from personal experience.
Yeah, or probably the skill either, to be fair. And so much that goes into that in terms of regulation and of the space and all that sort of thing. So, the fact that CoLabs exists is it's just amazing. Like, I'm just so thankful that not only do you have the space, but you're able to get us into the space. I know you pulled a number of strings to be able just to get us a bench space, within the lab, and so everything's grown from there. But without that, none of this would have happened.
Yeah, no, thanks. It's yeah, I know what you mean by pulling strings. That felt like negotiating a peace treaty. But no, it ended up really well, and I think it's been really exciting because there has been just some flow between both sides, and it has been, I guess, it seems like it's like a nice amicable space, like having multiple companies working in the same sort of space, which was always our vision for it. So I think rightfully so, people were a bit like, oh, can we make this happen? But I think that once you realize that totally different platforms, totally different technology, and we're all trying to make good things happen in the world. I think that sort of change happened. Like, I think you were just actually having a coffee with James. You just rocked up to the lab just before I left. So I think that's what's so nice about having a space and having a community of people who are trying to strive towards, like what you mentioned before. We kind of branded as impact-oriented innovation. And there is so much scope and potential for that within the life science sector. Like, there, pretty much everything we've done up until now using the scientific method and quite a lot of other approaches, let's say like modern industrial sort of complex, like they're all of the reasons why, I mean, it's really effective, but it's also all the reasons why we have all these problems that we're facing now. whether it's the environmental crisis, the like social crises, food insecurities, all of these things come from us maybe not thinking about like the ethical or moral implications of things, and maybe not only trying to maximize financial value rather than thinking about value as a holistic concept where there's, I hate to have to financialize it, right? But like social capital, like ecological capital, knowledge capital, spiritual capital, like there are all these different things which, we should value and we should respect. But I guess the current paradigm, as I said, might not necessarily value them the same. But yeah, it's so nice to be able to have these conversations and hear that sort of stuff. We get that sort of feedback enough from people, but it is, I guess that's why we're here. And sometimes it's nice to know that the suffering is not for no reason, right?
Probably should have given you that feedback earlier. But I think, one of the things I learned, through having the gym, and, we probably had, 20 staff and 600, 700 members or whatever. The culture is really important, and the culture really comes from the leadership. So I think, what your mission, at CoLabs and being impact driven, yourself and Andrew and providing a facility for like-minded people to come and work on those sorts of things really drives the culture and sets up the culture for us all to, some of us are working on the same thing, some of us are working on very different things, but we're able to collaborate. And whether that's, physically in terms of what we're actually doing and what we're trying to produce, or whether it's, just support or, advice or guidance and all those sorts of things. I think it's really important. So again, congratulations on the culture that, and the business that you've set up, because that's what enables all of that.
For sure. And then I guess I'm just going to play ping pong on this one, right? Because I think that wouldn't happen unless we didn't support motivated people trying to make a positive change that are inspiring. Like, sure. And I think that in the risk of this just sounding like a compliment tennis, I think, it's, for us, it's like we have to function like a yes, we're accessible, affordable infrastructure, but not everyone can get in, right? Like, I won't mention the exact sort of company, but we've had people reach out for space, and we're like, that is a hard no, absolutely not. Not a crazy amount of them, but you do find some people trying to, let's just say, do unethical things, or maybe do things that I would say support or sustain the current way of doing business, which is no longer viable on this planet. So there is a like an element from us, like functioning like a semi-permeable membrane. So we have to be making sure that we are curating the right sort of community. And it's so important. We see it all the time. There's so many, like we call it like engineering serendipity. There's so many random little conversations that'll pop up around lunch or at a community gathering or something like that. And all these different things that it's all non-linear, and you never really know how it'll play out, but it's always really exciting to see collaborations appear, or even things like the Yarra River Keeper coming in, and they're looking at making a microplastics filter to remove plastic from the Yarra River. And, VJ might be looking at helping a little bit with his understanding of fluid dynamics. So like there's so many fun and exciting things where people are happy to help out, which that can save an organization or someone, months of work or thousands of dollars just by one little conversation where someone's like, oh, have you tried this, or have you thought of that? And those sort of qualitative things are so hard to, like, where do I put that in my grant acquittal for the like everything's jobs and growth, rightfully so. It's really easy to measure, and it's kind of bloody important for the government, who are our primary sort of funders. But yeah, it's hard to quantify a lot of this sort of stuff because it's all qualitative, but I would argue it's almost more important than the facts and figures. Sounds like you're kind of echoing that from, within your team as well.
Absolutely. Well, it's building that ecosystem, that hasn't, it's been fractured or segmented, I guess, previously, but bringing all of that together. And as you said, being able to work on different ideas or help other people with those ideas, just having those contacts or experience or whatever, without having that central hub, none of that would have happened. You wouldn't make those connections, you wouldn't interact with those people. So yeah, and that's intangible, right?
Yeah.
Collaborative, not competitive is how it feels. There's examples that you wouldn't even be aware of guys like Cortical Labs helping us out with equipment and things like that. That yeah, it's really nice.
Yeah, I mean, we try and do our best to not always speak it, but show it a lot of the way in which we try and carry ourselves with everything. And I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. Is that we try and really bring, like, we're all there's no, such a small ecosystem, and we're all striving to do good in the world. It doesn't really make any sense if we're like not helping each other. And even from like an emotional perspective, like trying to go from 0 to 1 in any space is a big thing. And especially if you're pushing against the standard narrative, like it's just having other people who are around there who can even just be like, I totally get you. I understand.
Yeah.
You know, that in and of itself can be massive, because sometimes you go home or you chat with friends and they're just like, bro, I don't know what you're talking about. Like,
can't relate.
Yeah. So even that side of it, I think, is really something I really appreciate. And I think it's been great being able to have you guys around. I think it's really been a key part of being able to cultivate that culture. So yeah, thank you for making that happen.
Thanks for having us.
Exactly.
Anytime. I think I've liked where this has gone. Like, obviously there's all the questions, but I kind of like leaving them as a bit of a maybe we can go there and just sort of see where it emerges. But I think I might kind of bring it back to some of the stuff that you're doing. So you mentioned earlier regulations, you know, because like obviously you thought maybe we can try and tackle this from the political side of things. Now you are tackling them from an organizational side of things, but back to that political side of things, right? Because there's so much that you have to go through from a regulatory stand to make things happen with Magic Valley. So how has that progress been going?
So where we're at is we're not quite ready to submit a regulatory application. There's a fairly well described pathway for novel foods to get regulated in Australia, but because it's novel foods of any type, it's necessarily very broad in terms of the instructions that are there in the manual. So interestingly, in a couple of weeks, there's a group getting together in Sydney, including the regulators from different state governments and the federal regulators, the Food Standards Australia, New Zealand, and various companies, representatives, to talk about the regulatory side of things. And it's difficult for everybody because, one, it's new, and two, these regulatory bodies, they don't have unlimited people and unlimited funds to deal with every question and every type of new thing that comes along. So hopefully it's going to get easier with time, and as products go through and get regulated and information comes out, that will make it easier for new products, but also make it easier for the regulators to know the products that are grouped into specific types of categories. So your synthetic biology, your precision fermentation, your cultivated cells, what types of questions and what types of testing needs to be done for each of those, and are they different, are they the same, etc. So it's a really interesting time, and I think it's happening worldwide in this space, and different. I was reading an article yesterday. It was more on an opinion piece saying that there's a real opportunity for countries to put together a relatively streamlined but careful novel food pathway, and they will potentially have quite a large boom in terms of products coming through and new companies and jobs and growth. So it's be fascinating to watch what happens.
Are you seeing anywhere potentially taking that leadership anywhere around the world? Like, to my mind, from what I can see, right, it's like the only place I know that it's legal is Singapore. Is it legal in the States? Is it legal in Europe? I know that Italy straight up banned it. Anyway, that's a whole other story. Yeah. Are you seeing glimmers of hope anywhere around the world?
Yeah, I think so. So in Singapore, there is one regulated product, but that was over 2 years ago and nothing has gone through since. So, which is interesting. In the US, there's a couple of products. It's a complex regulatory pathway in the US where you need to go through the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, and then you also, and this, to be clear, this is for cultivated meat, not for any other products. So you've got to go through the FDA and through the US Department of Agriculture. So 2 large companies have received a no further questions from the FDA, which means no further questions at this time, which is like a tick, but then their facilities need to be approved by the USDA, and that hasn't occurred yet. And at least one of those was over 6 months ago that they got the no further questions. So the exact pathway is not yet laid out for people to see. One good thing from those no further questions asked is that redacted and not too heavily redacted versions of the applications were then made public. So that gives a lot of information to other regulators and to other companies around the world, to the sorts of things that need to be achieved. But the FDA deals with all of the human clinical trials with human cell therapy, which is quite different than a chicken nugget. So are the barriers, or are the standards that are being set, are they necessarily appropriate? And that's the sorts of things that regulators, who I know talk to other international regulatory bodies, will be discussing and are discussing as we speak, I think.
Yeah, it's fascinating because it seems like it has been handballed quite a lot from different regulatory bodies around, and almost like, because it doesn't fit firmly within a category, as you're sort of saying, like, it's cultivated meats and this has come from regenerative medicine, but it's actually a food product. It's not a therapeutic. And since it doesn't fit a box to tick and it's being sent to tick boxes, it's kind of, there's a lot that has to be figured out to make that happen. But it's also like, if you look at it, I'd love to know, like, from a lobbying perspective, or because I'm sure things get fast tracked, or I'm sure there are other things, look, I guess maybe it's just food, right? But I'm just, in my mind, I'm thinking about like junk food, e-cigarettes, all these other things, or like social media, all these other things that just can be let out into the world without having to worry about any of that, right? So it's kind of like, it's interesting, or like restaurants don't need to go through, Fazans. Like, it's interesting to see all these roadblocks. Obviously, it's important, right? But it's fascinating just to see, like, are some of these roadblocks there for the benefit of the people, or are they just there, like some tech just flies through, I don't know. I just thought I'd put that out there. I'm curious to see what your thoughts are.
Yeah, wading into dangerous waters here. You're right, though. I think there's a lot of really large incumbents occupying the space at the moment in terms of food, which I think is going to be challenging, as it would be in any industry where there's large incumbents that want to protect their commercial interests. And I think we've definitely indirectly felt that already, and I expect that to become a direct issue at some point. But you're right in terms of other products and other industries not having to deal with all of that. Unfortunately, we do. There's no escaping it.
Yeah, I think what's something interesting that we've spoken about offline as well is like aligning with those people who might originally kind of see you guys as a threat, and then them realizing that actually this could be a strategic way to diversify their portfolio and it might actually be beneficial. Have you sort of thought about how you would look at, again, bringing back that, let's say the jiu-jitsu approach, have you thought about ways of grappling with that and how you can work with rather than against, bringing on this sort of collaborative theme that we're talking about? Have you actually had any of those sort of discussions with other people in the space?
Yeah, it's funny. Early on, when we were just getting started, I had a number of traditional producers reach out to me to see whether or not we could, develop products, and how much of that was genuine and them trying to find out what we were doing. It's hard to put your finger on. But there were definitely some large scale producers that I had a few conversations with. But also a number of the smaller producers as well, for the very reasons that you mentioned. They wanted to safeguard their business and their livelihood, and they wanted to understand like what we were doing. Is this going to be a threat? And work out the lay of the land. And I think it very much depends on who you speak to within those organisations as well. We've found typically that people in the younger demographic are more probably accustomed to change and ready to change, and more open to adopting technology, which I think is just a generational thing. It doesn't, not necessarily in food, but just willingness to adopt technology and to see how that could work, rather than doing not the same thing we've always done, and this is the way we do it, and all those sorts of things. I mean, the world is changing, even if we just talk about the climate and those sorts of things. So things have to change, and it just really depends on the people you speak to. They will either see you as an irrelevance, or they will see you as a threat, or they will see you as an opportunity. So that's been the experience so far. So look, I'm open to all of those conversations. We'll just see how that plays out.
Speaking of open to conversations, how has it been going trying to close a funding round? Like, it sounds like there's been a lot of conversations over the past couple of weeks that I've even sort of seen walking in and walking out, and it sounds like conversations is a big part of what you're doing at the moment. How's all that going in this current climate? I know it's pretty hectic trying to make money appear.
Yeah, so the fundraising climate or environment has been really quite challenging, probably for the last almost 12 months, I would say. And that's not just in our industry. I think that's in every industry, just given what's going on in the world and macroeconomically.
SVB Bank kind of threw a spanner in the works for everyone, hey?
Yeah. And I think a lot of that comes back to sentiment as opposed to any real impact. I think a lot of it's sentiment driven. And in the space where we're looking to raise, in the venture capital space, a lot of it, unfortunately, is a little bit of group thing. And what's the latest and shiniest and brightest thing that we can get into and invest in. And
is it a Web3 DAO crypto food source? Can I buy it as an NFT?
Exactly. Yeah. Are you an AI expert? So there's a little bit of that, and at the moment, as we've seen, particularly in our space, food tech, and even more so in cultivated meat, the amounts that are being invested have significantly reduced, and so it's been a really difficult conversation to articulate our differences, our key differentiators in terms of our technology and that sort of thing, and so there's still a lot of interest. And as you mentioned, there's been a lot of people, come to the lab, have conversations with us, whether that's government or private or whatever the case may be. But it's definitely a really difficult fundraising environment at the moment. And so, for us, as you were talking about earlier, reaching those technical milestones is really important. For us, cell line development, creating the prototypes, having tastings. And then, next thing for us is really, scaling up and regulatory approval to be able to show that progress, to investors, to say, look, hey, we said we're going to do this and we did this plus this, is really the good news story, I guess, around what you're doing. But we do get a lot of questions around, regulation, regulatory approval, commercialization. A lot of people don't understand where the industry is actually at. We'll get questions like, what are your sales? How much are you moving it? And it's still a really large education piece around not just the industry, but, what we're doing in particular, and trying to explain how our technology is different and get people to, be able to, see that and make comparisons and those sorts of things. But it's definitely a challenging fundraising environment right now.
Yeah, I think just picking up on something you said there, it's like trying to explain to people that it's biotech, but it's not just tech. Like it's not SaaS. We're not going to 1000x in like 3 months. we're not going to run A/B tests. Like it's not like the process of doing deep tech. I would classify you guys as deep tech biotech, right? And that sort of thing, the pathways and the feedback loops and the time it takes to get anywhere is so much longer. And you really need those investors who have the understanding of the intricacies and the nuances of it all. And and I guess as well, like what was it, like the last 2 years have been bumper investment periods for biotech, and maybe with I'm just curious to see why, because you were thinking, was this a discussion we were having? Only like a tenth of the amount of funding that went into life science and cultivated meat from last year has gone in this year so far.
In the first quarter of this year.
Yeah.
I don't know. I tend to think of it a little differently in the last 12 months in that spin warning, but we haven't had money. So we haven't been able to waste money, but we've learned a lot in the last 12 months that if we'd had a lot of money, we would have wasted some of that money. And we also haven't diluted the cap table. And we've learned a lot in 12 months. So to me, it's not all negative that the funding climate has been so difficult in the last year.
Just don't ask me for any new pieces of equipment.
Yeah, that's all right. Well, I've just been bidding on some in a secondhand thing for us, so we should be right. We've got a couple of pieces coming through. But yeah, no, I think it's a really important thing that you mentioned there is that you can always turn shit into flowers, first and foremost. But I think that you guys being able to stick around, right, and still be able to make the projects happen is testament to your resilience as an organization and your adaptability. And I think that by being able to do that and having space to be able to make that happen, that's kind of like, that's actually useful. And that's yes, sure, it may have taken longer than you thought to close, but the fact that you're still here making stuff happen, I think that's testament to it. And so
thanks. How much would you like to invest?
Mate, I would if we could. I honestly would. I say that I feel like there's a few companies that we've got that we'd love to be able to support in that way, but we just don't have a couple of $1 billion up our back pocket.
Yet,
maybe. It's fascinating, because like me being in this space, again, is kind of subtle form of activism to your point as well. And even just having to get over that aversion towards money as a concept rather than seeing it as a vehicle for optionality and for positive impact. I grew up very much in that progressive side of thinking, where it tends to be many of the problems tend to emerge if you follow the money. But realizing that it actually can be a good vector for good if you can share a positive narrative and speak to the positive impact that can come from it. It's fascinating. Just those sort of alignments there, I think that's really interesting. What flavor ice cream do you reckon Magic Valley would be?
Magic Valley.
It's not going to be lamb flavored ice cream or pork flavored ice. Surely not.
I mean, I was going to say bubblegum, but I'm really not sure.
Well, we're definitely not vanilla.
Yeah.
I like mango, but
mango, bubblegum, and mango.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like bubblegum, but I think it's much better.
Yeah. Okay. I have time for bubblegum. I don't know what collabs would be. I mean, color-wise, I guess we're pistachio, but flavor-wise, I don't know. Yeah, we like the thing is we like all the different flavors of ice cream, So it's a difficult one to answer, but important questions we've got here. Definitely not fillers. I want to bring it back to something you were saying before, Andrew. You mentioned that, the cardboard was one element, like just figuring out that sort of stuff. What's the least scientific thing you've had to do when it comes to like jumping into the entrepreneurial role at Magic Valley?
I didn't think I would be quite so involved in social media, being on podcasts. I
can't see you as a TikTok guy. Actually, no, maybe you should do the TikTok. I do hear you have a dance background.
Look, it's pretty well known amongst my circle of friends that I do dance. But yeah, at Magic Valley, the least. Look, I think I'm the go-to person for the printer. I know how to work the printer at the office.
The key barista, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, the coffee machine, but that's pretty scientific, I think.
Fair.
You don't see it as an art, more of a science for you.
It's a bit of both. You gotta have your reproducibility there, and then you can add the layer of art on top of that. Look, I think this is scientific, but it's translating science to business talk. And there's something me and Paul talk about a lot in our podcast is they're actually two different languages, and communicating between the two and working out how to talk about the potential without misleading people, without making stuff up with it, but still saying, this could happen. We just need to do this, this, and this. It's developing that skill without having people glaze over because I'm talking about induced pluripotent stem cell reprogramming, blah, 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 which tends to people go, the business people tend to not want to hear about that too much, which makes sense.
But I like that you say that it's a balance, because I think that's something that's so important for startups to get right, is that you don't want to just be full Theranosing, because then you'll get sent to jail, obviously, right?
I'd like to avoid that.
Yeah.
Not even part Theranosing.
Right. Never go full Theranos. But there's still an important point there of like, because startups thus far, and especially in the tech space, you kind of can BS hype like that and be like, yeah, we're going to be the best thing ever. And like you kind of see this happen with a couple of biotech companies over in the States. I'm not going to name anyone. And now there's been a couple of colossal fails in the space that have happened because people are just making things up. They're just like, you've got essentially a hype person. And a lot of them do have really strong technical backgrounds, but I feel like that's always the issue when you're doing this 0 to 1 work or really pushing the boundaries of what's possible, is having to find that balance between this current sci and the sci-fi, and also just like not completely trying to use that sort of marketing rhetoric to say all these sort of things and not be able to deliver on them. I'd be curious to know how you've been finding that balance. Do you feel like you've come to a place now where you're comfortable?
I'm a lot more comfortable than I was at the beginning, and Paul's been really, really a really good mentor in that, in terms of Paul and Jacob, actually, the conversations that we have around how can we say this, how can we say this better, how can we say this so it's not misleading, and we workshop that internally before we head out to the venture capital or to whoever we're speaking to.
Yeah, I must say I was actually really impressed with the way you were handling some of your, what do you call it, hate speech? What do you call it? Trolls, yeah. Trolls. I don't know. Just like there were just the way that was, some of that response was executed, I think was some of the best handled approach to dealing with dissonance in this space I think I've seen. So, is there a plan behind how you deal with this sort of stuff, or?
It depends how we're feeling on the day, but no, look, Ella's been really good in that space in terms of highlighting some of those comments, calling them out, but then also educating around them as well. Because there's still a lot of
calling out or calling in. I feel like it's a bit more calling in than like it's not trying to other, which I think is a nice approach, which you don't always see a lot of the time.
Yeah, no, you're right. So, there's still a lot of misinformation, and we try to do as much education, as possible. Not just for us, but for industry wide as well, because obviously, for any of us to succeed, the consumer has to consume the product. The end consumer is is what it's all about. So, look, we take an approach to educate people that might be misinformed about what we're doing or the process, and we try and be as transparent as possible around that process, which we think is important for everybody to understand where their food comes from. And so look, we do get some of those comments, and we think it's important to address them, and do what we can to inform people.
And it's a bit of a team approach. Like Ella will say, we'll check the science with us sometimes, and say, "Oh, is this right? Should we?"
Has she got a science background at all?
She's doing a science degree.
Yeah. Okay. I was going to say, I felt like there had to be, because it just felt like too high a level of understanding to just be like some casual account manager.
No.
Yeah.
No. She's definitely got the science. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes a big difference, I think. I'd also love to know, we have kind of spoken a bit about obviously the financial stuff, but have there been any other challenges, like aside from lab space and aside from the financials, that you've had to overcome, like either as a team or as an organization in the last little bit? Like I find a lot of the time maybe not in this one actually, but a lot of the time, it tends to always be like the elevator pitch and all the positive stuff, right? But what are some things that you feel like challenges you've had to overcome and you're now sort of stronger for it?
How long have you got? It's that whatever that meme is, of the duck that's madly pedaling below water and everything looks fine on top. I think that goes for any startup. We've had a lot of challenges. Probably in the last 12 months, we had some challenges around some of the tech that we had to overcome. We were a fairly long way down one path and then realised we had to change paths and almost start all over again in terms of what we were doing, which just delayed things substantially. In terms of hitting those milestones and being able to do that, for me, that's probably the biggest hurdle that we've faced over that that past 12 months. There's been plenty of others though, but I think a key part of that is managing the team, managing the culture and the environment. We're lucky that a number of our team have startup experience. So I've worked in startups before, and they understand that there's a lot of ups and downs. They understand that there's funding challenges. They understand that they've got to help out with different aspects. Andrew's a great example. The whole team. I throw everything at them, and everyone helps out with different parts of the business that they have never experienced before. Have no experience in. Andrew's all over Twitter and Instagram and all over social, and we're doing podcasts and all that sort of thing. We take Wendy as another example. Who's a research scientist, trained cell biologist. Doing all our chefing,
also a chef.
cooking. Yeah, exactly. Same with Jacob. Can go on and on and on. So having that and having everyone's buy-in in terms of what needs to be done and what we're doing is super important, and we're really lucky in that regard to be able to overcome those challenges, because you do need a lot of resilience, because there are a lot of ups and downs, there are a lot of unexpected things that happen, whether that's pieces of equipment breaking down or not working, or not being able to get your hands on, being able to prove out certain data points and those sorts of things, getting thrown, random requirements from potential investors that you're speaking to that, want to see, various things.
So people being sick and other people jumping in and covering, or even starting to work before they were meant to, and coming on board with and just jumping straight in and really helping right from the get-go.
Yeah. And how important do you think that impact-oriented vision is to making that happen? I'd love to know, because it feels like it's such a strong part of your culture and what draws people to what you're doing.
I think you're right. I mean, that would be, my impression as well. Based on the team that we've assembled, everyone is very much, mission aligned, which I think definitely helps with that, with the culture. And that's evolved pretty naturally, to be honest. Obviously, I founded the business and I've got, fairly, strong views on, our ethical approach and those sorts of things. But I guess, that has potentially, attracted, similarly aligned people to the organisation and to coming to work with us. Even to the point where, we have no advertised positions. We haven't advertised for a role for
9 months.
9 months. Yeah. Like a long time. Yeah. I will get, 7 to 10 unsolicited job applications a week, that people want to come and work with us. And I don't hear that from other companies in the space. I hear other companies in the space, struggling to find people and to hire people, and so my guess is that, our culture and, our mission alignment is probably a key driver in that people want to come and work here. So I hope that means that people have heard good things about us. So look, I think it is really important, and I ask a lot of the team in terms of not just striving to the goals that we're achieving in normal business hours, but we do a lot of stuff outside of business hours. We whether it's events and that sort of thing. Talking to the community, attending conferences, all that sort of thing. We do so much weekend work and we do so much night work, and we're talking to people overseas in different time zones and that. So look, I do ask a lot, but everyone is on board, and look, I mean, I personally appreciate it, but I think it does all tie back into that mission alignment.
Yeah, I mean, like we see it day in, day out at the lab. Like there's people who are pretty much a part of the furniture. They're in all the time, making things happen. And it's just a really exciting thing to see when it's coming from. It feels like a yes, sure, you're pushing, but it does feel like a pull. It does feel like people are going, I'm trying to actively do something, and I feel like this has a positive, some good to add to the world, which I think is really exciting. Now, when we're talking about scaling this tech, is there any other tech that you're reliant on which doesn't exist yet to be able to get it to scale? How like when you look at people going, yeah, we're gonna get net zero by 2030, and 70% of that's going to be something that doesn't exist yet because science. Is there any element of that you think, like with scaling up, is there stuff there where you're like, we're hoping something comes through, or is your pathway at the moment, we're pretty confident that this either exists or it's possible to do? Or do you get sort of where I'm coming from that perspective? Like, obviously this would be way more ethical, right? But currently, like with all science, right? And this is just all innovation, right? It's kind of like the life cycle of any living system, right? A tree will extract more nutrients from its environment as it's growing. And then once it reaches a stage of maturity, then it gives back. It creates space for animals in all the hollows. It actually literally shares nutrients through the mycorrhizal fungal network with other trees, even from different species. So, is this sort of a thing where, you're acknowledging that now it's kind of taking a fair bit of energy and resources to make this sort of stuff happen? It's definitely going to be able to get to scale. But like from an environment, like is it energy? Is it media? What are the things that you see as like the next things that you really need to sort of tick off, or that might be adjacent but not a part of the core sort of tech?
I mean, Andrew can probably answer this better than I, but from my perspective, I think all the tech exists already for what we want to do.
Awesome.
and to scale. It can just be done better because we're a new industry, and we're only, very, 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 we're not even at zero. We're at, -1 basically, in terms of where the industry is at. So my viewpoint would be that all the tech, is there, ready to scale. We can just do things, more efficiently, cheaper, more sustainably, just as the industry itself develops. But Andrew's probably got a better perspective on it.
And I'd agree with what Paul said, but I think where there's And I think what you're digging for, in a sense, is space to play and space for innovation to occur. And to me, that space is not in the scale up. It's not in the development of media. It's in the recycling of what comes out as the waste product from the media, from the cells, and what parts of that can be reused and how can they be reused, but how can that be done cheaply and efficiently.
So like closing the loop on the material sort of elements of what you're doing is a big area of interest.
I think it's the way to really significantly bring costs down, or bring in other income streams with what's coming out that if can be used for somebody else's fuel
or something else.
Yeah, something like that. There's lots of ideas, but translating those ideas into industrial processes is, as we talked about, a long pathway.
And again, like before you can qualitatively expand, you kind of need to be really nailing that core tech. But as you said, as you progress as an organization, there might be these emergences of like industrial, like it's like industrial ecology. You know, one organization's waste is another organization's income stream or food stream, so to speak. So I feel like inevitably there'll be things there that can be woven together. And I mean, that's an exciting space that we'd love to explore and see how that develops. Because from my limited understanding, that is a major area of expense that if that could be alleviated, it could be, I don't know the exact figures of how much they could bring down the cost of the product, but I feel like it is a sizable chunk if there could be some sort of reuse or reduce or reuse element woven in.
So reuse, I think, is doable already. I think it's more the bits that you can't reuse, what can be done with them. Not easy.
Yeah. I mean, we see it all the time just in the lab space in general. There's so much, like even single-use things, like total tangent here, right? But one of the ideas we had was like, how do we stop that and stem the tide of single-use plastics? Surely we could reuse or find a way to work with some of the providers, because it's just so much of it. And again, it's like there's nothing. If that's the best we've got, you know, you don't really have a choice but to use it to some extent, right? And yeah, it's I guess I was wondering whether or not there's anything like that where you're sort of like, oh, we kind of have to do this now, but you know, in the future it would be great if X. Yeah.
A much cheaper grade bioreactor would be with a material that's cheaper to manufacture and safe and meets the regulatory requirements would be something that we're not directly working on, which would be very useful.
All right, we'll put it out there into the just manifest it, do some secret style stuff. I'm sure we can make it happen. I'm wary of time. How long what do we got? What are we feeling? Because I know that you're going back to back on the whole talking thing.
Yep. Probably getting pretty close to time.
Yeah. Was it okay? Well, then let's definitely call it. You're more than welcome to call it at any time for future reference.
It's all good.
But yeah, I think maybe we will call it here then, so that you can fit that one in. But yeah, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I think this is really interesting. I think there's so much more that we could talk about. So you probably get roped back in for another chat sometime soon.
Pull you in onto our podcast. I think it'll be the way to go. Episode 2. Yeah, part 2.
Yeah. Happy to flip the switch for part 2. We'll make it happen. But yeah, thanks so much for your time, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Sam.
It's been great, Sam. Thank you.
Perfect.